By the time my father called me for the 17th time that Sunday afternoon, I already knew something had gone very wrong at the resort. George Bennett was not a man who called repeatedly. He believed one voicemail was enough, and that everyone else should organize their lives around returning it. But my screen kept lighting up with his name, and the newest message was only 6 seconds long. "Lauren, call me back. What did you do?" I remember staring at those words while Sophie sat at the kitchen table coloring beside me, completely unaware that 2 days earlier, one phone call from me had reached farther into my parents' perfect little family vacation than I ever intended. At that point, though, I still thought this story was about favoritism. I hadn't yet understood that my mother had built an entire version of our family around a daughter she had deliberately left behind. Before I tell you how my father went from happily driving my son into the Blue Ridge Mountains to calling me nonstop, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me because what I uncovered after that first call changed the way I saw my parents, my sister, and even some of my own choices as a mother. And if you enjoy family stories where the truth eventually catches up with the people who think they can control it, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me to the end. 2 days earlier, Friday morning had started, so normally that I still remember being annoyed about coffee grounds on the counter. My husband Adam had already left for work. Owen was bouncing around the front hallway with the restless energy only an 11-year-old heading to a ranch vacation could produce, and Sophie had packed her own small backpack the night before. She had chosen a yellow neck pillow shaped like a crescent moon, tucked 2 paperback books inside, and spent 20 minutes deciding whether the stuffed rabbit she still slept with was too babyish to bring. Nothing about that morning felt like a warning because, as far as Adam and I knew, both of our children were going. My mother had sent the pickup plan 2 days earlier in the family group chat. The resort had a junior ranch orientation for kids 10 to 13 that started earlier in the day, so Dad would pick Owen up around 8:30. Brittany, my younger sister, had a client call that morning and would come for Sophie around noon, since the younger children's activities did not begin until later. Mom had even added a little horse emoji beside Sophie's name and told me not to forget sunscreen. It was specific enough that I had no reason to question it. I had spent years learning not to overreact to my mother's need to organize every family event, and this looked like one of the rare times her obsession with schedules was actually useful. Dad arrived 10 minutes early. Owen hugged me, yelled upstairs for Sophie to hurry because he wanted her to see the pictures he would send from orientation, then grabbed his duffel bag. Sophie came running down with the yellow neck pillow already around her neck and asked Dad if there were really going to be horses she could brush. He smiled, told her she would find out soon enough, and kissed the top of her head before leading Owen outside. That detail stayed with me later. He knew she believed she was coming. He looked straight at her little packed backpack beside the stairs, and he still drove away without saying a word. By 11:45, Sophie was wearing her sneakers and checking the driveway every few minutes. At 12:10, Brittany had not arrived. I texted her asking for an ETA, but nothing came back. I assumed her client call had run long. At 12:25, Sophie asked whether she should put her rabbit back in her room because maybe there would not be enough space in Brittany's car. I told her to leave it packed. Then I called Mom. She answered on the 4th ring with wind noise behind her and people talking somewhere nearby. I asked what time Brittany was supposed to reach us because Sophie had been waiting almost half an hour. There was a pause that lasted just long enough for me to think the signal had dropped. Then Mom said completely calmly, "Brittany isn't coming. Sophie wasn't invited." For 1 second, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. "What do you mean she wasn't invited?" Mom sighed as though I had asked a question we had already discussed 10 times. "Lauren, she wasn't invited. Don't ruin this for everyone." I stopped moving. That was when I saw Sophie standing in the hallway behind me. She must have come closer when she heard her name. Her yellow neck pillow slipped from her hands and landed on the floor without making much sound. Her backpack was still on both shoulders. I could feel the anger rise so fast that my fingers went cold. Years earlier, I might have started yelling. I might have demanded explanations until Mom found a way to make my tone the problem. Instead, I asked, "When did you decide that?" "It's already done," she said. "Owen is here. Everyone is settling in, and I am not having this conversation while we're trying to enjoy ourselves." "You told me Brittany was picking her up." Mom lowered her voice. because I knew you would make this difficult. I looked at Sophie. Her face had gone blank in the way children's faces sometimes do when they are trying very hard not to cry in front of adults. I ended the call without another word. Sophie stared at the floor for a few seconds before she asked, "Is it because Grandma likes Owen better?" There are easy lies parents can tell because we want to stop pain quickly. I could have said no immediately. I could have told her Grandma was confused or that there had been a mistake. But my mother had just lied to me about who was picking up my daughter, and I was not going to teach Sophie that protecting Grandma's image mattered more than what she had heard with her own ears. I knelt in front of her and told her that what happened was wrong, that she had done nothing to cause it, and that I was going to figure out exactly what had happened before I gave her an explanation that might not be true. I called Adam next. I did not hide anything or try to handle my family alone. He went quiet after I repeated Mom's words, then asked a question that turned out to matter more than either of us knew. "What exactly has your mom asked you for about this trip?" At first I said, "Nothing unusual." Then I remembered the email. 2 weeks earlier, Mom had sent me something called Family Content Permission. She had described it as routine paperwork connected to some travel partnership she was excited about. I had opened it, disliked how broad the wording was, and never signed it. Adam had never signed anything either. A few days after that, Mom asked me for updated pictures of both kids and their clothing sizes because, she said, the resort might provide a few coordinated items for family photos. At the time, I had rolled my eyes and sent the sizes because that sounded exactly like something Mom would care about. Now I sat at the kitchen table and opened the email again. Bright Path Travel Media was listed at the bottom with a contact name and phone number. I looked toward the hallway, where Sophie had taken off her backpack but left it sitting beside the yellow neck pillow. If Sophie was never invited, I said to Adam, why did Mom need her picture and clothing size? Adam did not answer immediately. Call the number on the form. Don't accuse anyone. Just ask what they think is happening. So I did. A woman named Melissa answered. I introduced myself as Sophie and Owen Bennett's mother and told her I was calling about the Bennett family campaign. I said my 9-year-old daughter was not on the trip. Neither Adam nor I had signed a campaign-specific release for her, and I wanted to make sure no image of Sophie was used in anything connected to the current project. Melissa went quiet. Then she asked, "Your daughter isn't traveling with them?" "No." Another pause. "Mrs. Bennett, can I put you on hold for a moment?" I said yes. When she returned, her voice had changed. It was more careful now. "Mrs. Bennett, our brief lists both of your children as expected participants. I need to put this into compliance review." That was the moment I stopped wondering why my mother had excluded Sophie and started wondering why someone outside our family had been told she was there. Melissa did not sound alarmed, which somehow made the situation feel more serious. She explained that Bright Path was not canceling my parents' reservation or removing anyone from the resort. The stay itself had been booked under my parents' names, and whatever they chose to do with that booking was their business. What Bright Path could do was pause any campaign material involving Sophie, hold several sponsored activities that had not yet been approved for reimbursement, and flag the participant information for review. She was careful with her wording, and I appreciated that. She did not tell me my mother had committed some grand fraud. She did not promise consequences. She simply said the company needed to understand why their family travel brief listed 2 grandchildren when one of those children was sitting at home with me. I asked who had told them Sophie would be there. Melissa said she could not walk me through internal correspondence while a review was open, but she could confirm that the campaign brief identified both children as expected participants and that Sophie's release was still marked pending. That word caught my attention. Pending meant they knew they did not have permission yet. It also meant someone had been moving forward anyway, assuming permission would arrive later. I thanked her, asked her to send me written confirmation that Sophie's image would not be used while they reviewed the matter, and ended the call before I said something fueled more by anger than facts. Adam came home early that afternoon. By then, Sophie had changed into shorts, and one of his old engineering company t-shirts she liked to sleep in. Her backpack was still by the stairs, but she had put the yellow neck pillow on the couch instead of packing it away. I could not tell whether that meant she still expected someone to change their mind or whether she simply did not want to touch it. Adam sat beside her, asked if she wanted grilled cheese for dinner, and did not ask her to explain how she felt. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He knew children sometimes needed normal things before they could handle painful ones. Once Sophie was watching a movie, Adam and I opened my laptop at the dining table. I created a folder and started saving everything in order. The release Mom sent on June 10th. Her request for updated photos and clothing sizes on June 22nd. The pickup message from June 24 explaining that Dad would take Owen early for junior ranch orientation and Brittany would collect Sophie at noon. I took screenshots of the call log from Mom and wrote down, as precisely as I could remember, what she had said when I asked about Sophie. Adam did not tell me to build a case. He simply said, "If they start changing the story, you should know what the story actually was." That sentence stayed with me because changing the story was exactly what my mother had always been good at. Not lying in ways that could be easily caught. Reframing, softening, moving the emotional center from what she had done to how someone else had reacted. If she insulted me at dinner and I left, the story became, Lauren walked out on the family. If Brittany forgot something important and Mom covered for her, the story became everyone makes mistakes. I had spent years believing I was immune to that pattern because I could recognize it now. Sitting at the table with those dated emails in front of me, I realized recognizing a pattern was not the same thing as preventing it. I searched my inbox for Bright Path and found another message Mom had forwarded weeks earlier, back when I had barely paid attention. It was a campaign calendar. The language was generic enough that I had assumed this was another small partnership, like the hotel weekend she had posted about the previous spring. The ranch trip was listed for late June. Final content approval was scheduled for the first week of July. And on July 9th, Bright Path had its annual partner dinner in Charlotte, where several family travel campaigns would be presented to brand representatives and regional partners. Mom had added a note when she forwarded it. Big opportunity for all of us. At the time, I had laughed and asked Adam what exactly all of us were supposed to do with a marketing dinner. Now, the phrase looked different. I saved the calendar too. For the rest of that day, I did not hear from my parents. Owen sent me 2 pictures from the ranch, one of a horse with a white blaze and another of a wooden lodge surrounded by trees. I stared at those photos longer than I should have, trying to decide whether I felt relieved that he looked happy or angry that he was happy somewhere his sister had been deliberately excluded from. The feeling embarrassed me almost immediately. Owen was 11. He was not responsible for decisions made by adults. I texted back that the horse looked beautiful and asked whether he was wearing sunscreen. He replied with a thumbs up and a picture of his red baseball cap. The next morning, Bright Path emailed me a short confirmation. Sophie-related material was on hold pending review. No current campaign content using her image would be approved without verified rights clearance. There was no dramatic language, no threat toward my parents, nothing that could reasonably be called punishment. I showed Adam the email, and he nodded. Good. That's what you asked for. It was not until Sunday afternoon, 2 days after the trip began, that my father started calling. The first 2 calls came while I was folding laundry. I ignored them because I was helping Sophie sort socks, and because Dad had never been a man who liked talking on the phone unless he wanted something. By the 5th call, I knew this was not casual. By the 10th, Adam looked over from the kitchen and said, "You probably need to hear what he has to say." By the 17th, the voicemail arrived. "Lauren, call me back. What did you do?" I listened once, then called him. He answered before the first full ring. Finally, "What happened? What happened?" His voice was tight. "Some of the planned activities got put on hold. Bright Path is asking questions. Your mother is mortified. We were supposed to have a private sponsored dinner tonight, and now they're saying it won't be covered until they finish reviewing everything." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. Don't play games with me. I told them Sophie wasn't there, and that neither Adam nor I signed the release." Dad exhaled sharply. "You could have called us first. Mom already told me Sophie wasn't welcome." What exactly was left to discuss? There was a pause, and I could hear a door close on his end. His voice dropped. "This is bigger than a few pictures, Lauren. Your mother has worked on this for months. These partnerships open doors. They bring connections. They bring opportunities for the family. For the family? You know what I mean. No, Dad, I don't. Because one member of the family is sitting at home after being lied to about who was picking her up. He made the small, irritated sound he always made when he thought I was focusing on the wrong thing. Sophie doesn't enjoy being on camera. Everyone knows that. Sometimes one person has to compromise so the rest of the group can have a good experience. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. What did Sophie compromise? That's not what I meant. She didn't agree to stay home. She didn't agree to be left out. So what exactly did she compromise? He went quiet long enough for me to hear voices somewhere behind him. Then he said, "You're making this much more dramatic than it needs to be." There it was, not an answer, a judgment about my reaction. I ended the call before he could pull me any farther into it. Afterward, I went back through the old BrightPath email chain, this time looking at who had been copied. Dad's name appeared several times beside the words logistics contact. In one message, he had confirmed the head count for the resort booking estimate and written, "Both grandchildren will be participating in the family experience." The email was dated before Mom told me Sophie was not invited, so it did not prove when Dad learned the plan had changed. But it proved something else. He had not been standing on the sidelines while Mom handled a little social media project. He had been involved. I saved that email too. Then I noticed an attachment farther down the chain. One Mom had forwarded to me almost 3 weeks earlier with the subject line, "Look how cute this is." I remembered opening it on my phone while standing in line at the grocery store and closing it after the first page. That afternoon, I downloaded it properly. The file name appeared across my screen. Bennett Family 3 Generations. One perfect getaway. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a full-page family photograph with Owen on one side of my mother and Sophie on the other. The photograph on the first page had been taken at Easter, months before the ranch trip. Mom stood in the center wearing one of the pale blue dresses she liked because she said bright colors photographed badly in spring light. Dad had one hand on Owen's shoulder. Sophie stood beside Mom holding a basket of plastic eggs, not smiling exactly, but not unhappy either. I remembered the picture because Mom had complained afterward that Sophie looked too serious. I had not remembered anyone asking permission to turn it into the opening image of a travel campaign. I clicked to the next page. The headline read, "3 Generations, One Perfect Getaway." Beneath it were short descriptions of everyone involved. Dad was presented as the retired family patriarch who loved the outdoors. Mom was the heart of the family, the one who brought everyone together. Brittany was described as the creative daughter who helped preserve family memories. Owen was our adventurous one, which was harmless enough. Then I reached Sophie, our shy one who comes out of her shell when Grandma gets her away from screens. I read the sentence twice. Sophie was not shy. She could walk into a library program knowing no one and make a friend before I found a chair. She talked to cashiers, asked waiters questions about dessert, and once spent 20 minutes explaining frogs to a neighbor she had never met. What Sophie disliked was being directed. She hated being told to laugh again because the first laugh had not looked right. She hated being asked to hug someone for a picture after she had already said hello. She hated hearing, "Come on, sweetie, just look happy." The deck had taken a boundary and turned it into a flaw. Worse, it had turned my mother into the person who fixed it. I kept scrolling. There were notes about family activities, photo opportunities, generational bonding, and natural moments of reconnection. Sophie's name appeared beside several suggested scenes, even though she had apparently never been invited to the actual trip. One note mentioned quiet child engagement, as if she were a marketing category instead of my 9-year-old daughter. I closed the laptop for a minute because I could feel myself getting angry in a way that made thinking harder. That was when I remembered a dinner from a few months earlier. Mom had invited us over on a Sunday. Nothing special, just roast chicken and potatoes. Before anyone could eat, she wanted a family photo at the table because she had arranged flowers and said the light was perfect. We took one. Then another, because Dad blinked. Then another because Brittany was looking down. By the 4th picture, Sophie had put her fork in her potatoes and said, "Can I eat before it gets cold?" Mom sighed. "One more, honey, and try not to look annoyed." Sophie said, "I'm annoyed." Everyone laughed except Mom, and I had leaned towards Sophie and whispered, "Just one nice smile for Grandma." Remembering that made something inside me twist. I had not forced Sophie into anything terrible. I had not knowingly helped Mom exclude her. But I had helped teach the lesson that Grandma's comfort sometimes mattered more than Sophie's no. I had called it keeping the peace because that sounded kinder than admitting I was tired of fighting with my mother over small things. Now, one of those small things was staring at me from a professional-looking campaign deck. I called Brittany. She answered with, "I was wondering when you'd get to me." That irritated me immediately. "What exactly were you expecting?" She sighed. "Lauren, I know Mom handled this badly." "Badly?" "I'm not defending what she said. Did you help make this deck?" A pause. "Yes." "How much?" "I cleaned it up. I fixed the layout. I wrote some of the copy. I uploaded footage. That's it." "That is not it." Sophie is described like she has some social problem Mom magically solves. Brittany groaned softly. "It's marketing language. She is 9. I know how old she is. Then why does the deck talk about her like she's a before and after project?" "That's not what it means. It says she comes out of her shell with Grandma. Lauren, she doesn't like cameras. That is not the same thing as being shy." Brittany went quiet. I let the silence sit there before asking the question I actually cared about. "Did you know Sophie wasn't going?" This time the pause was longer. "Brittany, I knew the plan changed." "When?" "Before the trip." "How far before?" "I don't know. A few days." I stood up from the dining table and walked toward the window because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. "And you were supposed to pick her up." "I know. You let Mom send me that schedule knowing you weren't coming." "I didn't send the schedule." "You knew it was false." "I knew she was trying to avoid a blow-up." I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. So lying to me was easier. "That is not what I said." "It is exactly what you said." Brittany's voice hardened. "You want to know the truth? Sophie hates being filmed. She complains when Mom asks for pictures. She gets tense. Owen doesn't. Having one kid there honestly made the shoot easier." For a second I could not speak. Then my phone buzzed against my ear. A message from Brittany had arrived while we were talking. She had forwarded one screenshot from a text thread. Near the bottom was a line from her own number. "One kid will honestly make the shoot easier." I stared at it. "That was your idea?" I asked. "No. It came from you." That sentence came from me. The decision did not. "Then send me the whole conversation." "I can't do that." "You mean you won't?" "Lauren, there are client details in that thread." "Then redact them. You're looking for somebody to blame." My daughter was packed and waiting at the door for someone who knew she was never coming. I do not have to look very hard. Brittany's voice dropped. "That message is out of context." "Then give me the context." She did not. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. When Adam came into the room a few minutes later, I showed him the screenshot. He read it once, then looked at me. "She suggested it," I said. "Maybe." I stared at him. Her own words are right there. Her words say one kid makes the shoot easier. Yes. They don't say she decided Sophie was staying home. I hated that he was right. Not because I wanted Brittany to be guilty, because certainty would have been easier. If Brittany had been the one who proposed leaving Sophie out, I knew where to put my anger. It would fit an old shape. Mom favors Brittany, Brittany benefits, I deal with it. Familiar damage is easier to understand than new damage. Adam handed my phone back. "You have a piece of a conversation. Don't make it the whole conversation." I sat down again and reopened the deck. Near the end was a production notes page I had skipped before. Brittany's name appeared beside editing and asset management. There was a reference to a shared project folder and another note that read, "Easter family B-roll, available for introductory montage." I remembered that Easter brunch clearly now. Brittany had brought a good camera because Mom wanted natural family footage for her page. She had filmed the kids hunting eggs, Dad grilling, Mom laughing beside the patio, Sophie crouched in the grass helping a younger cousin open a plastic egg that had gotten stuck. None of it had anything to do with a ranch. At the time, I had assumed those clips were just another batch of content for Mom's family page. Now they were sitting in a campaign file as available material. I still did not know whether anyone planned to use Sophie's old footage in a way that made it seem as though she had gone on the trip. I did not know whether Brittany had suggested excluding her or merely adapted after Mom made the decision. I did not know how much Dad knew when he drove Owen away that morning. What I did know was that everyone around me had been making plans involving my daughter while keeping me just far enough outside the conversation to prevent me from stopping them. That evening, another email arrived from Melissa at BrightPath. It was only a few lines long. She thanked me for confirming the release status, said the review was continuing, and asked for one additional clarification. Can you confirm whether Sophie ever told Linda Bennett that she preferred not to attend this trip? I read the question twice. Then I looked across the room at Sophie, who was sitting on the floor helping Adam build a cardboard castle. No one at BrightPath had asked whether Sophie had been invited. They were asking whether she had chosen not to go. And that told me someone had already given them an answer. I answered Melissa before I did anything else. Sophie had never told my mother she preferred not to go. In fact, she had packed the night before and spent most of Friday morning asking what time Brittany would arrive. I wrote that plainly, without adding what I thought it meant. Then I closed the email and sat there for a while, staring at the campaign deck on my screen. For the first time, I understood that I needed to separate two things very carefully: what I could prove to BrightPath and what I was only beginning to understand about my own family. The corporate side was simple. Sophie had expected to go. Neither Adam nor I had authorized her commercial use. Someone had told BrightPath a different story. The family side was harder because it stretched backward, through years of moments I had always dismissed as too small to matter. That afternoon, I opened my mother's social media page and searched Sophie's name. I was not trying to build evidence for BrightPath. I never sent any of those posts to Melissa. I was trying to answer a question I suddenly could not stop asking myself. How many times had Mom already described Sophie's absence as Sophie's choice? The first post that made me pause was from the previous Halloween. There was a picture of Owen with my parents at a fall festival, all three of them holding caramel apples. Mom had written that Sophie wasn't feeling well and decided to stay home. I remembered that weekend. Sophie had not been sick. She had refused to wear the matching orange sweater Mom bought because the collar scratched her neck. Mom told me it would be easier if Sophie skipped the festival rather than make the whole afternoon about the sweater. At the time, I had thought it was ridiculous, but not worth fighting about. I had taken Sophie to the library instead. Another post showed Owen on a small lake outing with Dad. The caption called Sophie "our little homebody" and said she had opted out. I checked my calendar because I remembered that weekend differently. Sophie had a birthday party that morning, but she had asked if she could join Grandpa afterward. Dad told me it would be too much back and forth and took Owen alone. Sophie had not opted out. Someone else had decided her schedule made her inconvenient, and then Mom had rewritten the decision as a personality trait. There were not dozens of examples. That almost made it worse. There were just enough for a pattern to be visible once I stopped supplying the kindest possible explanation for every one of them. I had spent years telling myself Mom was controlling about photos, Dad preferred simpler plans, Brittany was easier to coordinate with, Owen happened to enjoy the same activities as his grandparents. None of those explanations was completely false. That was why they had worked on me for so long. Adam found me at the table with 3 old posts open on my laptop. I kept calling this Mom being Mom, I said. He pulled out the chair across from me, because sometimes it was. I looked up. He added, "The problem is that sometimes it wasn't, and you used the same explanation anyway." That landed harder than if he had blamed me. I told him about Halloween, the lake outing, and the dinner when I had asked Sophie to give Grandma one more smile. I admitted something I did not enjoy admitting. I had believed I was setting boundaries because I no longer let my mother run my life. I said no to dinners when we were busy. I ended phone calls when she became insulting. I made my own decisions. Somewhere along the way, I had confused my ability to tolerate her with my ability to stop her from shaping the way my children saw themselves. Adam did not tell me I had failed Sophie. He asked, "What do you want to do differently now?" That question mattered because it pushed me away from guilt and back toward responsibility. My mother called the next morning. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I wanted to hear what story she was using now. I answered without mentioning BrightPath. She opened with, "I hear you've been going through old posts." I had not told Brittany or Dad that I was doing that, which meant one of them had guessed, or Mom had simply decided I was investigating her. Either way, I did not take the bait. "I have one question," I said. "Lauren, I am not doing another interrogation. Did Sophie tell you she didn't want to go on this trip?" Mom exhaled. "She never enjoys these things." "That wasn't my question. You know exactly what she's like when there are cameras around. She gets moody, she refuses to cooperate, she makes Owen tense because then everyone has to stop and deal with her. Did she tell you she didn't want to go?" Silence. Then Mom said, "Why are you trying so hard to make this sinister?" "I'm trying to get an answer. You are taking ordinary family decisions and turning them into some kind of attack." I waited. She did not say yes. That was the part I remembered most clearly afterward. If Sophie had really told her she wanted to stay home, my mother would have repeated that sentence immediately. Instead, she gave me adjectives. Moody, difficult, uncooperative. Words about Sophie's personality that were supposed to make the decision sound inevitable. I ended the call before the conversation could circle back to my supposed overreaction. Less than 10 minutes later, Dad texted me, "Drop this before you damage your relationship with your mother." I stared at the message, then typed back, "My relationship with Mom is not more important than Sophie's place in this family." He did not answer. That afternoon, I found Sophie sitting on the floor of her room with the yellow neck pillow in her lap. She had pulled it from the couch and was trying to stuff it into the bottom of her closet behind a basket of winter clothes. "Do you want me to help?" I asked. She shook her head. A minute later, she said, "Can we throw it away?" I sat on the floor beside her. "We can if you want to." She looked at the pillow. "I don't want it anymore." I could have promised her another trip right then. I could have opened my phone, booked a hotel, and turned the whole thing into a story about how Mom excluded her so Mom and Dad took her somewhere better. For a few seconds, I wanted to. It would have been easy, and it would have made me feel useful. But it would not have answered the question Sophie was really asking. So, I said, "We don't have to replace what happened with something shiny. You can be mad about it. And if you want to keep the pillow later, that's okay too." She leaned against my shoulder. After a while, she put the pillow back on the bed instead of in the trash. That evening, my phone buzzed while Adam was making dinner. It was Owen. Did Sophie really not want to come? I read the message twice before answering. She wanted to come. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. A minute passed. Then another message came through. "Can I call you later when Grandma isn't here?" I looked toward the kitchen, where Sophie was arguing with Adam about whether chopped parsley counted as green confetti, and a cold feeling settled into my stomach. I wrote back, "Of course." Owen responded almost immediately. "She keeps making me say something about Sophie on camera." Owen called me about 20 minutes later. By then, Adam had taken Sophie upstairs to start her bedtime routine, and I was sitting alone at the kitchen table with my phone face down beside me because I did not want to stare at it like I was waiting for bad news. When his name appeared, I answered on the first ring. His voice was low, almost a whisper, and I could hear the faint hum of an air conditioner behind him. I asked where he was. He said he had stepped into the hallway outside his room because Grandma was still downstairs with Aunt Brittany going through video clips. I told him he was not in trouble and that he did not need to explain anything he did not want to. That seemed to relax him a little. He started by telling me about the trip itself, almost as if he needed me to understand that not every minute had been awful. He had ridden a chestnut horse named Ranger. He had learned how to brush mud from a horse's legs. Grandpa had let him order a milkshake at lunch. The lodge had a game room, and another boy his age had beaten him badly at air hockey. He sounded like my normal 11-year-old son again for a few minutes, and I was glad. I did not want anger at my parents to turn every happy thing he had experienced into something contaminated. Then his voice changed. "Mom, they keep making me do stuff again." "What kind of stuff?" "Like walking into places." I waited. "They'll say, 'Do it again but look at Grandma.' Or they'll tell me to laugh, but I already laughed the first time. Aunt Brittany says they need options." "That sounds like filming," I said. "Do you want to be doing it?" "Some of it's okay." He paused. It was okay at first. I could picture him trying to be fair even while something bothered him. That was Owen. He hated accusing people of anything unless he was absolutely sure. "What changed?" He went quiet long enough that I almost asked if someone had come into the hallway. Finally, he said, "Grandma keeps making me talk about Sophie." Every muscle in my back tightened. "What does she want you to say?" "That Sophie doesn't really like trips like this." I closed my eyes. "Did you say that?" "No." His answer came fast. "What did you say?" "I said she wanted to come." I heard something brush against the phone on his end. Maybe his sleeve against the wall. Grandma said no and told me to do it again. I kept my voice steady. "What exactly did she tell you to say?" "She said to say Sophie would rather stay home because she doesn't like all the activities and pictures." My hand curled around the edge of the table. "And what did you do?" I said I didn't want to lie. There was no pride in his voice when he said it. If anything, he sounded worried. "What happened after that?" "Grandma got mad. She said I was making it harder than it had to be. Then Aunt Brittany said we could move on and come back to it later." I pressed my lips together so hard they hurt. This was no longer about whether Bright Path expected Sophie to be on a trip she had never been invited to. They were trying to create an explanation for her absence after the fact, and they wanted my son to help them do it. Then I made the worst mistake I made during that entire week. I said, "Then why did you go?" The silence on the other end was immediate. As soon as the words left my mouth, I wanted them back. Owen was 11. My father had picked him up before I knew Sophie had been excluded. Owen had gotten into Grandpa's car believing his sister would follow later. He had trusted every adult involved because that was what children were supposed to be able to do. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I know. You said Brittany was getting her." "I know, sweetheart. You told me that." "I know." My anger had found the wrong target for exactly 3 seconds, and 3 seconds was enough. I leaned forward over the table even though he could not see me. "Owen, listen to me. I should not have asked you that. That was not fair. You were invited by adults you trusted. You thought Sophie was coming later, because that is what we were told. This is not yours to carry." He did not answer right away. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm angry, but I am not angry at you. I didn't want her left home." "I know. Do you think she thinks I did?" "No. And if she ever feels confused about it, that is my job to help her understand, not yours to fix." I heard him exhale. That was the moment I understood something I should have understood sooner. Favoritism did not only damage the child who was excluded. It could also damage the child who was chosen, especially once that child realized the prize came with a role he never agreed to play. I asked Owen whether he felt safe. "Yes." "Has anyone yelled at you, threatened you, or stopped you from calling us?" "No." "Do you want Dad and me to come get you tonight?" There was another pause. The ranch was less than 3 hours away. Adam and I could have been on the road within 15 minutes if he said yes. I needed him to know that. I also needed to be careful not to turn my offer into pressure. "The trip ends tomorrow anyway," he said. "Grandpa said we're leaving after breakfast." "That's right. I kind of just want to sleep and come home with everybody tomorrow." "That's okay." "What if Grandma wants me to film again?" "You can say no. She'll be mad. She is allowed to be mad. You are still allowed to say no." He was quiet. "If you change your mind," I added, "you call me. It does not matter what time it is. Dad and I will come get you." "Okay. And you do not need to collect anything for me. You do not need to record anyone or take pictures or prove something happened. Just take care of yourself." That mattered to me. I was not going to turn my 11-year-old into an investigator inside his grandparents' vacation. We talked for a few more minutes about normal things. He told me Ranger had tried to eat another horse's feed. I told him Sophie had declared parsley green confetti and thrown some at Adam. He laughed, and hearing that laugh made me feel steadier. Before we hung up, I asked one last question. "When Grandma asked you to say Sophie didn't want to come, was Brittany filming?" "Yeah." "Do you know if they kept the first take?" "I think so." "Why?" "I saw it on the camera after. Aunt Brittany didn't delete it. She said she uploads everything first and picks later." I sat very still. "You don't need to worry about that," I told him. "Come home tomorrow." After the call ended, I stayed at the kitchen table until Adam came back downstairs. He looked at my face and stopped before he reached me. "What happened?" I told him everything, including the question I had asked Owen. Adam did not soften it for me. "That was a bad question." "I know. But you corrected it." "I know." I hated how ashamed I felt. But I also knew shame was useless if it did not change what I did next. Then I told him what Linda had been asking Owen to say. Adam sat down across from me. So Sophie was not just left out, he said. They're trying to make it sound like she chose it. That sentence brought every loose piece together. The deck describing Sophie as a homebody. Mom refusing to answer whether Sophie had actually said she did not want to go. Melissa asking whether Sophie had preferred not to attend. Dad saying one person sometimes had to compromise. Owen being coached to repeat the same explanation on camera. I had been asking the wrong question. I had been asking why my mother excluded Sophie. The more important question was why she needed everyone to believe Sophie had excluded herself. Once I understood that, the whole thing changed. This was not about stopping Mom from using a photograph without permission anymore. It was about stopping her from rewriting what had happened so thoroughly that a 9-year-old could eventually be told her own hurt was something she had chosen. Adam asked what I wanted to do. For tonight, I said, nothing. He looked surprised. Owen comes home tomorrow. Bright Path is already reviewing the campaign. I have what I know, and I am not calling Mom while I'm this angry. That was probably the smartest decision I made that day. I wrote down the details of Owen's call while they were fresh, including the exact wording he remembered. I did not record him. I did not ask him to repeat the story for Adam. I just made notes for myself and put the phone away. The next morning, I woke before 6, even though the house was quiet. Sophie was still asleep. Adam was beside me. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I remembered Owen's last comment. Brittany uploads everything first and picks later. The footage existed. Not because Owen had secretly gathered evidence for me. Not because I had tricked anyone. It existed because my mother had been so certain she controlled the story that she had filmed the moment before she finished changing it. And somewhere in Brittany's camera or project folder was the first take, with my son saying the one sentence they did not want anyone to hear. Sophie wanted to come. By the time Owen came home the next afternoon, my mother had already started telling her version of the story. I saw it first on her page. She had posted a photograph of herself and Dad standing on the ranch porch with the mountains behind them, both smiling as if nothing had happened. The caption did not mention me, Sophie, Bright Path, or the compliance review. It only said, "Sometimes the people you love punish everyone when they can't control everything. Family should be a place of grace, not retaliation." That was how Mom worked when she wanted sympathy. She rarely accused anyone directly if a vague sentence could do more damage. People filled in the blanks for her, and because she was usually the first person to speak, her version became the starting point. Within an hour, my Aunt Carol texted me. "Did you really get the vacation activities canceled because Sophie stayed home?" Then a cousin messaged, "Your mom said Sophie doesn't even like traveling. This seems like a lot." I stared at both messages and felt the old reflex rise in me. Explain everything. Defend myself. Send screenshots. Prove Mom wrong before the story traveled any farther. I opened the screenshot of her saying, "She wasn't invited, don't ruin this for everyone." My thumb hovered over the share button. Adam was beside me at the kitchen counter. He looked at the screen, then at me. "You can prove she lied," I said. "Yes. I could end this in 5 minutes. Maybe." I looked at him. "You don't think I should?" He took a second before answering. "I think you should ask yourself who pays for it if you do. I'm the one being blamed. I know. She's telling people Sophie chose to stay home. I know." I felt myself getting angry at how calm he sounded. Then he said, "If you post that screenshot, people are going to talk about Sophie. They're going to ask why she wasn't invited. They're going to speculate about her. Maybe strangers if your mom's followers spread it. Do you want her worst day becoming the thing people pass around to prove which adult was right?" That stopped me. I looked down at the screenshot again. My mother had already turned Sophie into content once. I was not going to do the same thing just because I had better intentions. I closed the app. "Fine," I said. "I'm not posting it." Adam nodded. "That doesn't mean you do nothing." I know. That distinction became important to me. Silence could be avoidance, but it could also be discipline. I was not protecting Mom. I was protecting my daughter from becoming evidence for an audience that had no right to her. Later that morning, Melissa from Bright Path emailed me. The review was still open. The Bennett family segment planned for the July 9th partner dinner had been placed on hold, but no final decision had been made. She said the company was reviewing participant information, rights clearance, and campaign materials. The message was professional and almost painfully neutral. Part of me wanted something more dramatic. I wanted someone official to say, "Your mother was wrong." Instead, I got, "We are reviewing the matter." It was frustrating, but it also forced me to remember that Bright Path was not a family court. They were not there to decide whether Mom was cruel. They were there to decide whether the campaign information and permissions were accurate. Mom, meanwhile, had no such restraint. By lunchtime, Aunt Carol had texted again. "Your mother says you cost them a sponsored dinner and embarrassed them in front of the company." I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Then Owen came home. Dad's SUV pulled into our driveway just after 2. I watched from the front window as Owen climbed out with his duffel bag. He looked tired, not traumatized, not frightened, just worn down in the way kids look after too much activity and too little sleep. Sophie beat me to the door. She stopped when she saw him, and for one terrible second I worried she would turn away. Instead, Owen dropped his bag and hugged her. "I'm sorry," he said. I stepped forward immediately. "No." They both looked at me. "You do not owe Sophie an apology for being invited." Owen's face tightened. "But I went. You thought she was coming later." Sophie looked up at him. "Did you have fun?" He hesitated. At first, that answer was so honest that something in Sophie's face softened. He told her about Ranger, the horse, and the air hockey game. He did not talk about the filming. He did not have to. They sat together on the floor, opening the bag of candy Dad had bought for the drive home, and for a while they were just brother and sister again. That mattered more to me than whatever my parents were posting. The peace lasted less than an hour. Mom called first. I let it ring once, then answered. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. "No. Your little phone call has turned this entire weekend into a disaster." I looked toward the living room where Owen and Sophie were arguing over which candy counted as sour. "You mean the company asked questions? They froze part of the partnership. Do you understand how humiliating that was?" "I understand they asked why Sophie was listed in a campaign she wasn't attending." Mom's voice sharpened. "Because she was part of the family concept, but not part of the family vacation. That is your interpretation." "No, Mom, that is a fact." She went silent. Then Dad took the phone from her. "Lauren, enough." His tone was controlled, almost reasonable, which was sometimes harder to deal with than Mom's anger. He explained that several sponsored elements had been placed on hold, and because some expenses had not been approved for reimbursement yet, he and Mom might have to cover them personally. I said, "Then cover them." His voice hardened slightly. "That's not the point." "It sounds exactly like the point." "The point is, you caused all of this without giving us a chance to explain." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the question I had asked Mom before. Did Sophie choose to stay home? Dad did not answer. I waited. Then Mom's voice came from somewhere near him. "Oh, for God's sake." Dad said, "Sophie has never liked these trips." That wasn't my question. "Lauren, stop interrogating us." Again, no answer. I ended the call. An hour later, Mom posted again. This time it was a photograph of Owen from the ranch, smiling beside a horse. The caption said, "Some children know how to enjoy the moment without making everything complicated." I felt sick. Not because I thought Owen had done anything wrong. Because now she was publicly defining one child against the other without using Sophie's name at all. Easy versus difficult. Grateful versus complicated. The same roles, just passed down a generation. I showed the post to Adam. He looked at it for a long time. "Do not show Sophie." I wasn't going to. Good. I muted Mom's page. That evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Brittany. For a second, I considered ignoring her. The last time we spoke, she had refused to send the full conversation and told me one child made filming easier. Then I opened the message. Mom just told Bright Path that leaving Sophie home was my production decision. I read it twice. A second message appeared. She told them I changed the participant plan because one kid was easier to shoot. Then a third. "Lauren, she is blaming all of it on me." I stood there with one hand on the kitchen counter, watching the typing dots appear again. For most of our lives, Brittany had been the daughter Mom protected. The daughter Mom defended. The daughter who always seemed to land on the safe side of every family conflict. But for the first time, Mom had something she wanted more than protecting Brittany. She wanted to save herself. Brittany called less than 5 minutes after her last text. I almost let it ring. A part of me wanted her to sit with the same uncertainty Sophie had sat with all weekend, but that would have been petty, and I was tired of letting my mother's behavior decide what kind of person I became. I answered and said nothing. Lauren, she's putting all of it on me. Her voice was tight, not angry so much as frightened. You were fine when Sophie was the scapegoat. That stopped her. I know how that sounds. It sounds accurate. I'm not saying I did nothing wrong. Good, because that would make this a very short call. Brittany exhaled hard. I could hear traffic somewhere behind her, then a car door closing. She told me she had pulled into a parking lot because she did not want Mom hearing the conversation. That detail told me more than she probably realized. Brittany had spent most of her life believing she was protected inside my mother's favor. Now she was whispering from a car because she had finally learned how conditional that protection was. I knew before Friday that Sophie wasn't going, she said. I stayed quiet. I didn't know when Mom first decided it, but I knew the plan had changed. And you still let me think you were picking her up. Yes. The word came out smaller than I expected. Why? Because Mom said she was handling you. I laughed once without humor. Handling me. She said if you knew early you'd make the whole thing impossible. So instead you let a 9-year-old pack a bag and wait by the door. I know. No, Brittany, I don't think you do. She went silent. Then she said, I thought Sophie would be upset for a day. Maybe 2. She hates the cameras anyway. I told myself she'd probably be happier at home. And the campaign? Another pause. I needed it. That was the first honest thing she had said that did not come wrapped in an excuse. My work has been slow. I lost 2 clients last winter. If this project went well, I could use it as a case study. Mom already had the partnership. BrightPath had recognizable regional contacts, and I thought if I made the campaign look good, it could help me get back into agency work. So you knew it was wrong, and did it anyway because it helped you? Yes. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. I did not forgive her. I appreciated the honesty, but honesty delivered after consequences arrive is not the same thing as integrity before they do. Send me the whole thread. I will. Not screenshots you choose. The full conversation. I exported it. That surprised me. You already did? After Mom told BrightPath it was my decision, there it was. Brittany had not suddenly developed a conscience. She had realized my mother was willing to sacrifice her career to save her own partnership. I'm sending it now. My phone buzzed. A file appeared. I downloaded it while Brittany stayed on the line. The conversation went back more than a week before the trip. At first, it was boring production chatter. Timing, outfits, whether Dad's blue shirt would clash with a lodge interior, which activities were likely to photograph well. Then the tone changed. Mom had written, Sophie is not coming. Brittany. What do you mean? The brief has both kids. Mom. Build around Owen. Brittany. We already told BrightPath both children. Mom, then fix the brief. I scrolled slower. Mom, do not bring Sophie. She questions everything and makes Owen tense. My jaw tightened. The next message was from Brittany. One kid will honestly make the shoot easier. I stopped there. That was the sentence she had sent me before. Alone, it had looked like a proposal. In context, it was still ugly, but it was not the decision. Mom had already made that. Brittany had adapted to it. That mattered. It did not erase what she did, but it changed what she was guilty of. I kept reading. Brittany. What do we do about the family intro? Sophie is in the concept. Mom. Use the Easter footage if you need both kids. Brittany. That will look strange if she isn't at the ranch. Mom, it's an intro. Nobody is analyzing it frame by frame. Then came the line that made me stop breathing for a second. Mom, if anyone asks, she chose to stay home. I read it again. Not, she probably won't mind. Not, she hates cameras. Not, the schedule didn't work. If anyone asks, she chose to stay home. The lie had been planned before Sophie ever stood in my hallway with her backpack. Lauren? Brittany said. I'm here. You see it? Yes. I told you that screenshot was out of context. You also left out the part where you still went along with it. I know. You drafted around a lie. I know. You helped Mom prepare an explanation for why my daughter wasn't there. I know. Her voice cracked slightly on the last one. I did not soften. You told the truth when the lie became dangerous to you. She did not argue. That's fair. I looked back at the messages. For years, I had thought Brittany was protected because Mom loved her more. The thread showed something colder. Mom loved cooperation. Brittany had always been good at providing it. The moment she became a liability, Mom rewrote her role as easily as she had rewritten Sophie's. What exactly did Mom tell Brightpath? I asked. That I made a production decision to simplify the shoot. She said I was the one who changed the participant plan and used old footage without fully explaining it. But you don't have authority to change the participant plan. No, I'm her contractor. I edit, upload, draft copy. I don't sign anything for Brightpath. Did they ask for proof? Yes. And? That's why I exported everything. I sat down at the table. Is there more? Yes. Her voice changed. What? The video? I straightened. Owen mentioned there was a first take. There is. Where? In the shared project folder. I waited for her to explain because I did not want the footage appearing by magic simply because we needed it. Brittany said she shot most of the ranch content on her camera, then transferred everything to her laptop at the end of each day. She uploaded the raw batches into Brightpath's shared project folder before selecting usable clips. That was her normal workflow because the agency wanted original files available for review and because she edited from the same archive on 2 devices. So when Owen saw it still on your camera, it had not been culled yet. Later that night, I ingested the whole batch. Every take went up before I picked selects. Why wasn't it deleted after? Because I was rushing. And because, honestly, I never thought anyone would need it. That made sense in the most infuriating way possible. The truth had survived, not because anyone was brave enough to preserve it, but because the people controlling the story had been too confident to clean up after themselves. I can send you the folder. No. Brittany stopped. I don't want the entire folder. I don't want every clip of my son. Send me only the part where they were talking about Sophie. Okay. And before you send anything, tell me exactly what's on it. She hesitated. Owen is standing outside the lodge. Mom is off camera. I'm behind the camera. I ask him what he likes about family trips. He says he wishes Sophie was there. And then, Mom tells him to do it again. I closed my eyes. What else? He says Sophie wanted to come. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. And Mom? Brittany went quiet. Brittany. She tells him that's not the line. I felt something cold settle beneath the anger. Send me that clip. Only that clip. A minute later, the file arrived. I did not open it immediately. I called Adam into the room first and told him Brittany had sent the full thread. I showed him the line about Sophie choosing to stay home. His face changed when he read it, but he said nothing. Then I told him there was a raw video. He pulled out the chair beside me. Do you want to watch it now? No. I looked toward the hallway, listening to Sophie and Owen upstairs arguing over a board game. Then I corrected myself. Yes. I need to know what it actually shows before I decide what to do with it. I pressed play. Owen appeared outside the lodge in the same red baseball cap he had worn in the pictures he sent me. He looked tired, but cheerful. Brittany's voice came from behind the camera, asking him something about the trip. Owen smiled and said, I wish Sophie was here. She wanted to come. There was a brief silence. Then my mother's voice came from somewhere off screen. No? Again. Owen looked toward her. Mom said, Say she likes staying home. Owen frowned. But she doesn't. My mother's voice sharpened. Owen, stop making this difficult. For a few seconds after the clip ended, neither Adam nor I said anything. The frame had frozen on Owen, looking off camera. His expression no longer cheerful, just confused. I replayed the sentence in my head without touching the screen. Owen, stop making this difficult. It was the same word Mom had used about Sophie. Difficult when she refused another picture. Difficult when she asked why she had to wear something uncomfortable. Difficult when she wanted to know why Owen got invited and she did not. Sitting there with that video open on my laptop, I finally understood that difficult did not mean rude or disruptive in my mother's language. It meant unwilling to cooperate with the version of reality she had already decided everyone else should accept. Adam reached over and closed the laptop halfway. You don't need to watch it again. I know. You already know what it says. I nodded, but I kept staring at the darkened screen. The temptation to send that clip to every relative who had texted me was stronger than I wanted to admit. One upload would have destroyed the story Mom was telling. No more vague posts. No more people asking whether Sophie had simply chosen to stay home. I could have ended the argument publicly with 20 seconds of video. That was exactly why I did not do it. I called Owen into the kitchen after dinner. I did not show him the clip first. I told him Aunt Brittany had sent me the recording from the ranch and asked if he remembered it. His shoulders tightened. The one where Grandma made me redo it? Yes. He looked down at the table. I saw it. Am I in trouble? No. The speed of that question broke something in me. Absolutely not. You did nothing wrong. I explained that Bright Path was reviewing what happened, and that the clip might help them understand why Sophie's absence had been described the way it was. Then I told him what I wanted to do, and, just as importantly, what I would not do. I am not putting it online. I am not sending it to people. I am not posting it on Grandma's page or mine. But Bright Path may need to see it privately. Are you okay with that? Owen thought for a moment. Will people at school see it? No. Will Grandma's followers see it? No. Just the company people? Yes. He nodded. That's okay. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And if you change your mind before I send it, tell me. He looked at me strangely. Can I do that? Yes. That question stayed with me too. Afterward, I spoke to Sophie separately. She was 9, so I did not dump the whole campaign mess into her lap. I told her Grandma had been telling some relatives that Sophie chose not to go on the trip, and there was a video where Owen said she had wanted to come. Sophie frowned. But I did want to. I know. Why would Grandma say I didn't? I could have answered with everything I now believed about control and image and favoritism, but none of that belonged on a 9-year-old's shoulders. Because Grandma is trying to make a bad decision sound less bad. Sophie considered that. Then I told her something else. Dad's birthday brunch was already scheduled for July 12th. I had reason to think Mom might bring the subject up there. If she told the family again that Sophie chose to stay home, I might need to play a short part of Owen's clip to correct that. Would you be okay with that? She looked immediately toward my phone. Not online? Never online. Just them? Just the adults in the room, and only if Grandma says something that needs correcting. Sophie nodded slowly. Okay, but don't send it to everybody. I won't. That conversation settled something in me. I did not need my children to manage my mother. I needed to make sure the way I protected them did not repeat the very thing I was accusing her of doing. The next person I called was Dad. He answered on the second ring. What now? I need one answer. He sighed. Lauren, we have gone over this. No, you keep talking around it. I opened the old logistics email on my laptop while I spoke. You confirmed both grandchildren in the participant count. That was before plans changed. Fine. When did you learn Sophie wasn't going? He hesitated. That hesitation was enough to tell me the answer mattered. Dad? I knew there had been some adjustments. Before the trip? Yes. And after you knew, did you tell Bright Path that one of the children was no longer participating? That was not my responsibility. You were the logistics contact. Your mother was handling the creative side. That is not what I asked. His voice sharpened. Why are you trying to make this sound like some conspiracy? I'm trying to understand whether you knew the participant information was wrong. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, We were trying to keep the campaign moving. There it was. Not an accidental misunderstanding. Not ignorance. A decision. So you knew. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you said. Lauren, there were schedules, commitments, people expecting material. You don't throw away months of work because one child is uncomfortable with cameras. One child wasn't uncomfortable with cameras. One child was left home. He exhaled hard. You are determined to see the worst possible version of everyone. No, I'm finally refusing to invent the best one. I ended the call before he could pull me back into the familiar loop. That night, I put together exactly what I was willing to send Bright Path. No old Facebook posts, no childhood stories, no theories about Mom's personality. Just the things directly connected to the campaign. The unsigned release, the relevant excerpts from the full message thread, the June 24 pickup text showing our family expected Sophie to travel, the raw clip, and a short written statement confirming Sophie stayed home in Charlotte. Before I sent anything, I showed Adam the packet. Too much? I asked. No. Too little? He shook his head. It answers the question they're actually investigating. That was the standard I wanted. Not, what will hurt Mom most? What proves the relevant fact? I emailed the materials to Melissa. The next morning, she called. She thanked me for limiting the submission and said the review was focused on 3 issues: whether participant information supplied for the campaign was accurate, whether rights clearance had been obtained or reasonably expected, and whether anyone knowingly continued with misleading material after the travel plan changed. She did not ask whether Mom loved Sophie. She did not ask whether our family had a history of favoritism. She did not care who had hurt whose feelings. And strangely, that made me trust the process more. This is not about judging your family, Melissa said. We're looking at what was represented to BrightPath and what content was being prepared around that representation. That's all I want you to look at. After we hung up, I received another email from BrightPath. It referenced Linda's creator agreement and the upcoming July 9th annual partner dinner. The Bennett campaign segment was still listed as pending review. Melissa asked whether I would be willing to attend a private meeting before the event to clarify the sequence of events. Mom would be there because she was the contracted creator. Dad would be there because he had acted as logistics contact. Brittany would be there because she had managed content and uploads. I read the email twice. Adam looked over my shoulder. You're going? Yes. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know. That was the difference between Adam and the people I grew up around. He did not turn support into control. He did not take over because he believed I could not handle it. He simply made sure I would not be walking into that room alone unless I wanted to. I replied that I would attend. About 20 minutes later, another message arrived from Melissa. It was only 1 sentence beyond the logistics. We need to establish who knew the participant information was inaccurate and when. I looked at the message thread from Brittany, Dad's logistics email, Mom's instructions, and the frozen image of Owen on the raw clip. For the first time since Sophie's yellow neck pillow hit the hallway floor, I did not feel confused. I knew exactly what each piece proved. The question now was whether my mother would keep lying after all of us were sitting in the same room. On July 9th, Adam and I drove into Charlotte for the BrightPath partner dinner, and the entire way I kept reminding myself why I was going. I was not going to humiliate my mother. I was not going to demand an apology from a room full of strangers. I was going because BrightPath had asked one question that should have had a simple answer. Who knew Sophie was not going on the trip? And when did they know it? By then, I had spent nearly 2 weeks watching every person involved try to make that question sound complicated. It was not. The event was being held in a hotel conference center downtown. BrightPath had banners in the lobby, sponsor tables near the ballroom entrance, and printed programs stacked beside the registration desk. I noticed the Bennett campaign before I even found Melissa. Near the middle of the program was a section for regional family travel features. One slot had been replaced with a generic panel title. I knew immediately that it had been ours. Mom must have noticed it too, because when I saw her across the lobby, she was holding the program open with both hands and staring at that exact section. She and Dad were dressed as if they were about to accept an award. Mom wore a cream suit and pearl earrings. Dad had on the dark blue jacket he used whenever he wanted to look more important than the occasion required. Brittany stood a few feet away, in black slacks and a blouse, looking like someone who had not slept properly in days. When Mom saw me, her expression changed for half a second before settling into a smile so controlled it might as well have been armor. Melissa came over before anyone could speak. She thanked us for coming and led us into a smaller meeting room off the main ballroom. There were 2 other BrightPath representatives inside, one from partnerships and one from compliance. Adam sat beside me. Mom and Dad took the opposite side of the table. Brittany sat near the end, not beside either of them. The compliance representative started by explaining the purpose of the meeting in language so neutral it almost felt clinical. Linda was the contracted creator for the campaign. George had served as logistics contact for booking details and participant counts. Brittany was a freelance contractor working for Linda on editing, uploads, and copy. She did not have authority to sign releases or make participant representations on behalf of BrightPath. Sophie's campaign-specific release had never been signed by either legal parent. Mom folded her hands on the table. That was being handled. Melissa looked at her. By whom? Lauren was going to sign it. I said nothing. The compliance representative glanced down at the file. Mrs. Bennett, did Lauren ever tell you she intended to sign after reviewing the final materials? Mom hesitated. She never said she refused. That was a familiar kind of answer. If I had not said no in the exact language Mom wanted, she treated that as eventual consent. The representative continued, We are not here to determine family intent. We are here to determine what was represented to BrightPath and whether the campaign proceeded on accurate participant information. That distinction visibly irritated Mom. Then Melissa asked the question I had been expecting. Who made the decision that Sophie would not attend the ranch trip? Mom answered immediately. Brittany. I turned toward my sister. Brittany did not flinch. Mom continued. She was managing production. She said one child would make the shoot easier, and I trusted her judgment. Brittany looked down at the table once, then back up. That is not what happened. Mom's eyes hardened. Brittany placed a printed copy of the exported message thread on the table. The compliance representative already had the digital version I sent, but having the pages there changed the room. It made the whole thing feel less like family drama and more like a sequence that could not be softened. Brittany pointed to the first relevant exchange. Mom had written, Sophie is not coming. Then, build around Owen. Then, do not bring Sophie. She questions everything and makes Owen tense. Only after those messages had Brittany written the line Mom kept hiding behind. One kid will honestly make the shoot easier. Mom leaned forward. That was still Brittany agreeing with the change. Yes, I said, after you made it. She snapped her head toward me. You don't get to interpret private messages however you want. I'm not interpreting them. The compliance representative intervened before she could turn the room into another family argument. He asked Mom directly, Did you know Sophie would not be attending when these messages were sent? Mom sat back. She was becoming increasingly difficult about being filmed. That answer changed the temperature in the room. Melissa said, That was not the question. Mom looked at her, then at me. I asked the one thing I had been waiting to ask face to face. Then why was she still good enough to stay in your campaign? Mom's mouth tightened. She was part of the family concept, but not part of the family trip. That is an oversimplification. No, it isn't. The compliance representative slid another page forward. It was a copy of the creator agreement section dealing with participant accuracy and rights clearance. He read no dramatic legal language. He simply summarized it. Material information about participants had to be accurate. Required permissions had to be obtained before applicable content was used. If plans changed, BrightPath had to be told before campaign material was built around outdated information. Then came the messages Brittany had sent me. Use the Easter footage if you need both kids. If anyone asks, she chose to stay home. Mom shifted in her chair. That was about storytelling continuity. Melissa's expression barely changed. Storytelling continuity cannot contradict the underlying participant status. Mom looked at Dad as if expecting him to rescue the conversation. He cleared his throat. This is getting blown out of proportion. We were trying to save the campaign. The compliance representative turned to him. Save it from what? Dad's face changed. It was small, but I saw it. He had spent days trying to present himself as the reasonable person standing between emotional women. In one sentence, he had admitted there was something they knew needed saving. He looked at the table. I mean, from unnecessary disruption. Melissa asked, Did you know Sophie was not traveling when the participant count still reflected both grandchildren? Dad hesitated. Yes. And did you notify BrightPath? No. Why not? He looked annoyed now. Because my understanding was that Linda and Brittany were handling the creative adjustments. There it was again. Everyone had known enough to keep moving. but no one wanted to own the decision once the consequences arrived. The raw clip was not played aloud in the room. Brightpath had already reviewed it privately. I was grateful for that. Owen had agreed to let them see it for exactly this reason, not to become the centerpiece of a corporate confrontation. Melissa only referenced it once, saying the footage was consistent with the written messages indicating Sophie had wanted to attend and that a contrary explanation had been coached after the fact. Mom's face went pale. She looked at Brittany. "You sent them that?" Brittany met her eyes. "Lauren did." Mom turned toward me. "You had no right. I had both kids' permission to use it privately for this review." She stared at me like that answer offended her more than anything else I had said. The irony was so obvious I did not need to point it out. The meeting ended without raised voices from Brightpath and without the kind of public spectacle Mom had always accused me of wanting. The partnership's representative said the current Bennett campaign would not move forward. The family segment was removed from that night's program. Brightpath would not use footage of Owen or Sophie. Sponsored elements that had not yet been approved would not be reimbursed. Future collaboration within Brightpath's own partner network was also being closed. Mom did not lose her house. Dad did not lose his retirement. No one called the police. No one announced anything from a ballroom stage. What they lost was exactly what they had tried to preserve by lying: the campaign. For the first time since this began, Mom had no version of events that could change the outcome. After the meeting, Dad asked whether we could talk like a family. I said no. Mom followed me into the hallway. "You destroyed something that was good for all of us." I stopped. "No. I corrected what you told them. The rest was your contract." Her expression hardened. "You always have to make everything about being right." I looked at her for a second, then kept walking. Adam and I did not stay for the partner dinner. On the drive home, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was the family group chat reminding everyone about Dad's birthday brunch on July 12th. The date had been on the calendar since early June, before the ranch, before Brightpath, before any of us knew what that brunch would become. A minute later, Aunt Carol sent me a private message. "Your mom says she's going to explain everything Sunday." I almost ignored it. Then another message came through. She says everyone needs to hear why Sophie really stayed home. I read that twice and felt something inside me go very still. Brightpath had taken away the campaign, but Mom still believed she owned the family story. By Sunday morning, I had already decided that Owen and Sophie would not come with us to Dad's birthday brunch. I was not interested in making either of them sit in a room while adults argued about a trip they had never asked to become the center of. Adam agreed immediately. We arranged for them to stay home with a sitter they both knew well, and before we left, I reminded Sophie of what we had discussed. If Grandma told the family that Sophie had chosen not to go, I might play one short part of Owen's video to correct that. Sophie looked at me and said, "Just don't put it online." I promised her again that I would not. Owen had already given me the same permission for private use. I put my phone in my bag and told myself I would only take it out if Mom forced the issue. Dad's birthday brunch had been on the family calendar since early June, long before the ranch trip and long before Brightpath. That mattered because I did not want the day to feel like some trap I had arranged. Mom had chosen the setting herself by announcing to everyone that she planned to explain what really happened. When Adam and I arrived, the house looked exactly as it always did for family gatherings. Flowers on the dining table, coffee on the sideboard, too much food, Mom wearing something carefully chosen to look effortless, Dad moving from person to person with a drink in his hand, trying to project normalcy. Aunt Carol hugged me awkwardly. A cousin gave me a quick smile and then looked away. Brittany was already there, standing near the kitchen doorway with her arms folded. She looked exhausted. Mom greeted Adam warmly and barely looked at me. For the first 20 minutes, no one mentioned the trip. Then everyone sat down. Dad thanked people for coming, made a joke about being 65, and started cutting into the cake Mom had ordered. For a few minutes, I thought maybe she had changed her mind. She had not. Mom set down her fork and looked around the table. "Since everyone seems to have heard different versions of what happened with the ranch," she said, "I think it's time we clear the air." Dad's shoulders tightened. I stayed quiet. Mom continued. "Lauren contacted Brightpath because she was upset that Sophie stayed home. That call created problems for a campaign we worked very hard on. The company overreacted." Brittany panicked. And now people are acting like we deliberately did something cruel. Brittany stared at her plate. Aunt Carol glanced at me. Mom went on, "The truth is that Sophie never enjoys trips like that. She doesn't like being filmed. She complains when plans change. She gets overwhelmed. We thought she would be happier at home, and Lauren turned that into an attack on the whole family." I looked at Adam. He did not speak. He did not need to. I asked, "Are you saying Sophie chose to stay home?" Mom looked directly at me. "Yes." That answer came easier now than it had on the phone. I asked, "She told you that?" She made her feelings very clear. "That's not the same thing." Mom sighed. "Lauren, please don't do this. I'm asking one question. Did Sophie tell you she did not want to go?" "Yes," Mom said. Brittany looked up sharply. I continued, "And you never asked Owen to tell people Sophie preferred staying home?" Mom's expression hardened. "No." I waited a second. "You're sure?" "Yes." Dad shifted in his chair. "Lauren, enough." I looked at him. "I'm giving Mom a chance to say exactly what she wants everyone here to believe." Mom leaned back. "I have said it." That was when I reached into my bag. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. "This is not going online," I said. "I'm not sending it to anyone. I'm playing one short clip because Mom just made a claim in front of the family that directly contradicts what happened." Mom's face changed. "Don't you dare." I pressed play. Owen appeared on the screen outside the lodge in his red baseball cap. "I wish Sophie was here. She wanted to come." Then Mom's voice came from off camera. "No, again. Say she likes staying home." Owen frowned. "But she doesn't." Mom's voice sharpened. "Owen, stop making this difficult." I stopped the video. No one said anything at first. I locked my phone and put it back in my bag. Aunt Carol was the first to speak. "You made him say his sister wanted to stay home?" Mom's face flushed. "You're hearing one clip with no context." "What context changes that?" Carol asked. Mom looked around the table as if she was waiting for someone to rescue her. No one did. Finally, she said, "Because somebody had to make the trip work." There it was. Not denial anymore. Justification. She pointed toward me. "You all know what Sophie is like. She can be difficult. She questions everything. She refuses to cooperate." Owen was excited. "We had a schedule. We had commitments. I was not going to let one child derail an entire weekend." Dad said quietly, "Linda, stop." Mom turned on him. "You agreed with me." The room went still again. Dad looked down at his plate. He did not deny it. That silence did more damage to the image of him as the reasonable bystander than anything I could have said. Brittany pushed back her chair slightly. "Stop." Mom looked at her. Brittany's voice was steady. "Sophie wasn't the problem. We were." Mom stared at her as if she had been slapped. "You are not going to sit there and pretend you had nothing to do with this." "I'm not." Brittany looked at me briefly, then back at Mom. "That's why I said we." That mattered. She did not try to climb out of the hole by standing on Mom's shoulders. She took her share of it. Aunt Carol looked genuinely sick. I thought Sophie really hated family trips. "She doesn't," I said. Carol shook her head. "Your mother told me that more than once." One of my cousins, Erin, spoke from the other end of the table. "Linda, I need you to stop posting pictures of my kids unless you ask me first." Mom stared at her. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has to do with the fact that I always assumed you were just sharing family pictures." Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. No one shouted. No one called her names. That made the moment worse for her. People simply stopped supporting the version of events she had built. One cousin moved her chair closer to Carol. An uncle asked Dad whether he had known Sophie was staying home before he picked Owen up. Dad said he knew there had been a change. No one accepted that as an answer. Mom looked around the table and seemed to realize, maybe for the first time, that her usual strategy was not working. There was no emotional outburst from me to point at. No dramatic accusation she could call cruel. No public post she could say embarrassed her. Just her own words, followed by her own voice on a video. She turned to me. "So what now? You punish us forever?" "No." "Then what do you want?" I had thought about that question for days. "I want rules." Mom laughed bitterly. "Rules?" "Yes." I kept my voice calm. "Owen and Sophie are not going on solo trips with you or Dad for now. No commercial content involving them. No posting their pictures without asking us. Visits happen when Adam or I are there. And if either of you keeps dividing them into the easy one and the difficult one, contact gets reduced further. Mom stared at me. You cannot control everything. I'm not trying to. You're controlling access to our grandchildren. Yes. Dad looked at me then. Lauren, that's extreme. No. Extreme was letting Sophie pack for a trip you knew she wasn't taking, then trying to teach Owen the lie you wanted everyone else to believe. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You took my family away from me. For years, that sentence would have worked on me. It would have pulled me into defending my intentions, softening my boundary, offering reassurance before I had even protected myself. It did not work anymore. No, I said. You kept choosing the picture over the people in it. Mom looked away. Dad leaned toward me. You could have handled this privately. I did. He frowned. I called the company privately. I spoke to both of you privately. I didn't post the video. I didn't send screenshots around. Mom brought this into the room. He had no answer. Adam and I left shortly after that. I did not stay for cake. The next few weeks were quieter than I expected. Bright Path never restored Mom's campaign. Her page stayed active, but Owen and Sophie disappeared from it completely. Brittany stopped managing her content and removed the ranch project from the portfolio she had planned to use. She and I still spoke, but carefully. I appreciated that she had finally told the truth. I did not pretend that erased everything she had done before telling it. Dad called once and asked whether he could take Owen fishing. I said no. Not forever. Just not yet. For once, he did not argue. Sophie never asked for a replacement vacation. I was glad I had not tried to buy one for her. What she needed was not a better resort. She needed to know she was not the kind of child who had to become easier to deserve a place in the family. A few weeks later, I was making dinner when I heard both kids laughing in the kitchen. Owen had grabbed my phone because I had asked him to check a recipe, and somehow he ended up taking a picture of Sophie with flour on the tip of her nose. She immediately said, "Delete it." He handed her the phone without arguing. She looked at the picture. Then she smiled. "Actually, can you send that to Mom?" He did. I still have it. No filter. No matching outfits. No perfect lighting. No sponsor. No caption explaining what kind of child Sophie was supposed to be. Just my daughter laughing because she wanted to. And after everything that happened, that felt more like family than any picture my mother had ever staged. You should never teach a child that love must be earned by being easier, quieter, or more convenient. When relatives exclude one child, rewrite what happened, or use family image to excuse favoritism. Your job is to protect the child, document the truth, and set boundaries you can enforce. You do not need endless arguments or public humiliation to prove your point. Clear limits, consistent consequences, and respect for consent can stop harmful patterns before they pass to another generation. If this story gave you something to think about, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories.